The uncertainty about climate change and the economy in general are necessarily things related to future outcomes, right? It's much easier to measure what's going on now than to anticipate what's going to happen in the future. It's a really good question to think about what's the relationship between the economy and financial markets and climate change. As an economy, when you start producing goods and producing output for people to consume or to use, there's necessarily going to be some kind of impact that comes from that. So just by its nature, because we need energy to produce goods in an economy, that's going to lead to carbon emissions. Then that starts to feed back on what happens in the economy. The role that finance then plays is what are the risks associated with that? And how do we value a firm, or how do we think about the consequences and value the costs of climate change related to that? It's fairly common in policy groups to think about something called the social cost of carbon, which is essentially the dollar value you place on avoiding putting another unit of carbon emissions into the atmosphere. It's a really nice metric that people have come up with to say how costly is climate change from an economic perspective. But one thing that we saw that was missing in a lot of this analysis was, what do I do about the amount of uncertainty that exists both in terms of economic consequences as well as climate change consequences? One of the main things that we learned from our paper is that uncertainty has this multiplicative effect for how significant the social cost of carbon can be. You will see implications that lead to a higher social cost, policy that protects against it. If economic damages from climate change are large, that's going to increase the effect, that's going to make social costs larger. Economics and finance in general have really useful and valuable tool sets to help us think about important policy questions. And climate change is clearly one of these important policy questions. And I think a large part of that is because of how much uncertainty there is about climate change. And that's where policy is really important, helping individuals take into account the consequences of their actions and integrating that with economics and finance, where we can put meaningful prices or valuations on those consequences, is a really important question that I think is something that's necessary for people to work together to solve these types of problems. I think is super important and can produce tool sets that could help us answer a lot of interesting questions and hopefully help us develop meaningful and rigorous solutions to problems that matter for individuals and the global economy as well.